Well, today we've seen a lot of accounts and presentations from institutions, universities, educators, and I think we at Group GTI are in a unique position to kind of look at a number of institutions across the UK. So we actually work with essentially all of the universities in the UK and actually lots of the employers as well. So we're sort of in a good position to talk about this and look at some of the challenges that students are experiencing in the UK in particular. Okay, so it's a little bit about who we are and what we do. So we're based in the UK. The company is called Group GTI, but there are multiple sort of sub-brands or products within that. So Sybil is the market research arm, which surveys students nationally, and that's the research that I'll be talking about today and bringing to you. But we also have other brands that educators may be familiar with. For example, Target Jobs is our student-facing platform. So it's a careers site for students, that helps them with all of their kind of questions around careers and content. And in particular, I wanted to talk about Target Connect, which is our careers discovery platform used by educators across Europe, I believe, but primarily in the UK. And this platform helps educators track students' career readiness. So it's obviously a tech offering supporting students throughout their career journey, connecting them with employers, and most importantly, helping institutions understand, the impacts that they're having on students' career readiness, which is what this slide deck is all about. Okay, so a little bit on the methodology, on the research that you'll be seeing today. So I mentioned that Sybil is a market research organisation, and we survey almost 80,000 students annually across the UK, and that's both in schools and universities. So the kind of age group that we'll be looking at here is 12 to 25. So very much looking at that entire student journey from school, and looking at that kind of first career experience all the way through to graduation and looking at graduate opportunities as well. We are also extremely focused on diversity. So we capture kind of all elements relating to backgrounds such as gender, ethnicity, sexuality, socioeconomic status, and disability. But today I'll be focusing on gender and socioeconomic status because that has global relevance in terms of metrics. And of course, as I mentioned, this is very much a UK case study to give you that perspective. Okay, so in terms of the agenda, what I want to talk to you about today is, first of all, looking at the impacts of the pandemic. This conference is set in the context of the fact that young people have been some of the most impacted by the pandemic in terms of unemployment, and of course struggling with their skills and development and motivation as well, has been highlighted by the previous speakers. So we want to have a look at the data on the UK situation there. We're then going to have a look at what's happening in schools. So we talk a lot about graduates and their challenges, but actually when does it all begin? When are those decisions shaped, and what can educators do using this data to kind of help level out the playing field, particularly for gender and socioeconomic backgrounds as well. We're going to have a look at some stats around careers in the virtual era. So how are students feeling about their future career prospects in the context of virtual working and some of the new developing sectors following the pandemic? We're going to have a look at employer priorities. So what do Gen Z actually want from employers today? And again, how can educators meaningfully support that? And then we'll finish off with looking at skills. So skills that students are confident in, as well as some of the skills gap and any support that educators and employers can provide to young people. So hopefully that will be interesting. And before I kind of get into the meat of the data, I just wanted to set the context for the UK. So here I've got some youth unemployment statistics in OECD countries and kind of overall. And we can see that overall youth unemployment of students aged 16 to 24 in the UK is 13%. So that's actually, a relatively positive stat. So just to put it into context, we can see that, for example, the OECD average youth unemployment at the moment is 14%, whereas the EU average is 18%. So EU obviously has quite a bit of diversity of countries, and I've highlighted two particular EU states. So Spain, we know, has had a long-standing traditional problem with youth unemployment at 38%, and I'll touch on some of the reasons as to why that's happening and how we can address that. And we actually experience some similar problems in the UK as well. Whereas Germany, for example, is doing exceptionally well and is a leader in that sort of global and EU market, and has only got 8% youth unemployment. And one of the reasons for that is that Germany is exceptionally good at vocational training. So it's really encouraging young people to look at a range of options, not just go to university, but actually to prepare them for the world of work and to listen to employers and to be connected. And I think creating that ecosystem and that dialogue between employers and universities is extremely important. And that's something that we also struggle with in the UK. Okay, so as I mentioned, let's have a look at the impacts of the pandemic. So how is this changing the situation that we've got? So every year in our research, we ask students, to what extent they agree that it will be tough to get a job in the following year. So what essentially is the level of anxiety related to jobs? And each year, the level of anxiety is quite high for students and for graduates. So it's at around 67% of students agree that they think it will be challenging, it will be tough to get a good job. But in 2021, we've seen that figure go up to 80%. So, while students have always had career anxiety, that's obviously been exacerbated by the pandemic, by COVID, and particularly students in final year of university are feeling really, really anxious about this. Having said this, 61% of all students felt that their courses at university provide them with the skills necessary for the labour market. So there is still some confidence that they're gaining the right skills at their institutions. However, of course, that number could be a lot higher as well if those skills were directly relevant to the types of jobs that they will be doing. And of course, the focus of this session is understanding how career options and career readiness is impacted by background, as I mentioned. So another statement that we test every year in the research is to what extent students feel that their career prospects are determined by their social background. And if we split this by, different student groups, we can see that white students, only 37% of students agree that that's the case. The total, so looking across all of the different minorities, that's at 42%. And if you look at, if you look at BAME students, so that's essentially a grouping of Black and Asian ethnic minorities in the UK, and that would be different for every country, but you all have your own minorities that you're struggling to engage, and particularly those from a lower socioeconomic background. 54% of those students feel that their career options are impacted by their background, and I think that's an extremely powerful stat and something that we have to continue to challenge, from as early on as school. Okay, so, what are students doing as a result of COVID? What are they more likely to do in terms of their futures and their careers in a mature market like the UK? So generally we find that because of COVID, students are more likely to look for jobs that allow flexible working and allow working from home. So that flexibility around employment is going to be increasingly important to Gen Z and to young people. And we can also see that 16% of all students say that they're more likely to do a postgraduate degree as a direct result of COVID. So, of course, that's another impact that educators will see, is that there'll be lots of students sort of looking to wait out this potential recession, this uncertainty in the labour market, and actually stay in education for a bit longer. And we have to ask ourselves what challenges this then creates when we've got lots of students graduating with master's programmes. Have we got the right jobs to put them into? How is the labour market adapting to that? That will be really interesting. And another finding you can see from here is that students are a lot more risk averse. So they're less likely to start their own business than they have in the past. So that entrepreneurial spirit perhaps has been dampened by the pandemic. And generally they're choosing to live with their parents or nearer to home, and perhaps are more concerned about relocation and kind of spending that money that they normally would. And now in terms of sectors, what we find is that, perhaps unsurprisingly, IT and technology is the most popular sector for university students and young people in the UK, particularly for graduates. And that's grown in popularity even more in 2021 following the pandemic because of perceived job security and all of the benefits. And we've seen some IT companies really boom and grow in this current climate. So that's attracting a lot of students, but also creating a lot of competition. Have students actually got the right skills to be able to enter those careers? And we know that consistently employers tell us that they're struggling with tech skills, digital skills, data science skills from young people. So again, that poses a challenge for educators in addressing this kind of gap. Other areas that have really increased in popularity are consulting, financial services. So again, banking, insurance, financial services, perhaps seen as a more secure place to work. And those are the key things I like to highlight. Public sector is also really, really popular in the UK as a direct result of this. So just highlighting this in terms of, what educators might want to focus on. And just to paint the picture of the jobs available in the UK at the moment, we currently have over 50% of our young people that go to university. So that's a really high, well, some countries definitely have higher rates of of entry into higher education, but that's pretty high. So that's going to create unique challenges for us in terms of getting the right jobs for students. As a result, we have around 800,000 graduates per year. So that's 800,000 students that complete a university degree, whether that's undergrad or postgrad. And then if we look at the top employers that offer graduate schemes for students, so specific programs for graduates to develop them, that's only around 46,000 schemes. So, you know, in terms of tailored graduate jobs, there's obviously a huge mismatch in terms of what's available and how many students are looking to get those jobs. As a result, employers report that they get around 60 applications per graduate scheme. So obviously a high proportion of those graduates do try for the very top schemes, and it's obviously extremely competitive here in the UK. And we also know that since 2020, there's been a decline in graduate recruitment as well by 12%. I believe that's getting better now, but certainly there's been an impact, you know, of the pandemic and COVID that employers were recruiting a little bit less. And as a result, some of the skills that are most missing in terms of what employers are looking for and what they're struggling to find in that kind of student market are numerical and technical skills. That continues to be a challenge. And as you can imagine, gender is going to be a huge differentiator here as well. Resilience is another skill. With all the change and uncertainty, employers really want to see students that are resilient. And how can educators help to kind of build that and create that? And thirdly, emotional intelligence. You know, and with working virtually, not meeting each other quite so much, that's also going to be something that's going to be increasingly challenging for us to develop in young people. So I mentioned that all of these challenges start pretty early in schools. So let's have a look at some of the data from young people aged 12 to 18. First of all, unlike Germany, in the UK, there's less of a focus on vocational routes, and actually most students really aspire to go to university. So we've had a real push from the government to encourage more people to go into that, you know, tertiary education, and we're seeing the impacts of that. So generally about 70% of young people say they want to go to university, even though not all of them end up actually doing that. And interestingly, following the pandemic, that's gone up to 78%. So, you know, as a result of the crisis, instead of students looking at apprenticeships and the vocational routes and other training that takes them directly into employment, what we've seen is actually an increase in the university education. So the problem is not going to go away, and we obviously have some challenges again in developing the right skills in students that are needed now, you know, kind of needed immediately. So that's a really interesting result of the crisis. And then when we look at student priorities, again, so starting very early, you know, in school, first of all, when we look at future aspirations in 10 years' time and think about Generation Z in terms of what they want to achieve, the number one thing that they want is having a job they enjoy. So Gen Z young people place a lot of emphasis in their career development, and they really, you know, are thinking about this very early in their journeys. Financial stability is the second priority for students in 10 years' time. And thirdly, owning a house, which is a particular challenge in England and in the UK to actually buy your own property to be able to afford that with the kind of current challenges. That's really, you know, ahead of other things like having a family, making a difference, running my own business. It's having a job they enjoy and having that financial stability is key because of all the uncertainty that these people have seen. But I've split this data by gender, and you can see again that females and males will have different preferences, with females more focused on things like making a difference. They really want to be in a job that's meaningful and that's focused on community and impact, and they're less likely to want to run their own business, so they're less you know, willing to take that risk compared to males. So those differences are still very much present. When we look at causes that young people care about, we can see that social justice is the number one cause that they want to contribute to, followed very closely by climate change. So this, again, is going to inform the types of careers that young people are looking at and the types of careers that educators should be connecting them with, finding that meaning and purpose around it. However, again, if we look at our different student groups, we can see that aspirations are different. So, for example, for students from a lower socioeconomic background, they are less concerned with climate change and much more concerned with addressing, you know, issues like poverty, healthcare, law and crime order. So obviously that's driven by their own experiences and their own challenges that they would have experienced. Whereas for students from a higher socioeconomic background, they're much more interested in going into politics and impacting climate change. So again, how can we, you know, challenge some of those aspirations so that all students see all opportunities as accessible where that is relevant. And the final point on young people at school is that their perceptions of the types of careers that they can do develop as early as year 7. So these students will be, you know, 12, 13 years old when they've decided that potentially a career in tech is not for them. So what you see in this chart is that we know that tech is the most desirable sector for young people at the moment. And we can also see that females are consistently significantly less interested. And that gap starts very, very early on. And yes, it closes a little bit as students get older, but not very much. So again, it's about perception of what you can do as a female and the skills that you develop from a very young age, which I think is a big problem for careers of the future in particular. Okay, and what about careers in the virtual era? So recruiting students in this current climate, what are some of the challenges? So first of all, we know that even in the UK, with all of the career guidance and support available, there are students that are still not using that support from their universities. And why is that? So generally we find that only about 50% of all students are satisfied with their university career service. So clearly there's a lot more work to do in the type of guidance that we provide. And that's also gone down this year following the pandemic, right? So that virtual engagement has been a little bit tough for students in feeling meaningfully connected to their career prospects. Some of the reasons they cite for not using career services is that they're too busy. They don't, which is interesting given that we know students are so anxious about their careers, they don't find the time. They're unsure about their career prospects, or they feel that the services offered to them are not relevant. So it's challenging some of those perceptions. And the fact that students don't feel they can ask about careers because they don't know what they want to do, is a real barrier. So actually kind of saying to students, we can help you understand what to do. We can help you ask some of those questions to yourself. And just because you don't know what to do doesn't mean you shouldn't be talking to us to help you figure that out. So some really interesting barriers and definitely a lot of career anxiety for young people at the moment that we're seeing. And then in terms of engagement, what is it that young people ultimately want from their educators in that career support? What is it they're expecting? Here we look at all the different activities that students can have with employers while they're at university. And we can see that overall students have a strong preference for face-to-face engagement with employers. So the pandemic has been really difficult for students in that respect. Particularly students really value insight days with employers. So that's when they can go and meet employers at their place of work, in their offices, have a look at what employers are doing, what that feels like. Career fairs, so big events organised for students to meet employers from a range of sectors. Actually, students still really value, and they've really missed that in the pandemic when that's been virtual. So creating those connections, and even things like working with student society. So if students are already invested and committed to a particular hobby or a skill, how can they connect to employers through that skill? That's really interesting and preferred by students overall. And then, of course, a big part of what helps students with career readiness is work experience. And in the UK, we have lots of students taking up part-time jobs and part-time work, which is great because that helps them develop skills, and that's something that educators should encourage and support. We also have almost 50% of our students volunteering and doing charity work, which is great. However, when we look at internships, and internships are a specific type of work experience that's linked directly to your career or the type of employer that you want to work for. So it's not just a part-time job, it's actually a focused training career experience, right? We see there's really huge inequality and it's much less accessible to students overall. So in this instance, we see that students from a higher socioeconomic background are significantly, almost twice as likely to get an internship and to have that experience and opportunity than students from a lower socioeconomic background at university. And we've really got to ask ourselves why that's happening and what we can do to change that. So again, there's obviously a lack of confidence and engagement from a lower socioeconomic group. But actually, again, thinking about the pandemic, that's presented some opportunities in terms of building those skills. So when we look at virtual internships and doing work experience virtually, which increasingly employers in the UK are offering, we can see that the uptake has been a lot higher from students from a lower socioeconomic background in particular. So in total, 28% of all students said they've done a virtual internship, but 37% of those from a lower socioeconomic background have done that. So it would appear that that's opened doors and that's made that work experience element more accessible, which is brilliant. And again, we should continue to focus on that, and educators can really use this data to encourage students to apply for these opportunities. When we look at priorities in virtual work experience, so again, how can employers build that experience so that it's inclusive? We can see that for students from a lower socioeconomic background, the internships being flexible with their university work and part-time jobs is really important. And also they might need more well-being support, so mental health and well-being support. While for students from a higher socioeconomic background, they're more focused on networking opportunities and those direct graduate opportunities post-internship. So again, just taking that into consideration in terms of the environments that we create for students. So that takes us nicely onto employer priorities. What is it that Gen Z really want from their employers, and what does that look like in the UK? So I think this is going to be universally relevant in terms of young people and this current generation. But the number one thing that students want from their employers is good career prospects. They're not just looking at immediate gain. They're not focused on the starting salary right now, but what they really want is that long-term growth and the ability to progress, train and learn on their career. They're also interested in interesting work, so they want the jobs that they're doing to be meaningful and interesting and challenging. And again, training and development is a huge priority. So that's the top 3 elements that students are focused on. Now, on the other end of the scale, if you look towards the right on the chart, we can see flexible working, yes, it's important, but actually in the context of other things, not as important. And also status and prestige of employers, for Gen Z is massively deprioritized. So it's less about status and more about doing meaningful work and making sure you're growing and developing. But the real reason I'm showing you this chart is to show you the differences between, again, males and females or the different student groups. So in this instance, we can see that females are going to be a lot more focused on diversity and inclusion. So when they're looking at employers, they want to know that there is female leadership in the organization, that females are going to be treated fairly, and again, that they can fit in. So building that confidence for females and providing that information to females is really important. They're also more focused on excellent role models. So again, I mentioned leadership and how relevant that is. And potentially also a little bit more focused on things like flexible working. So I think that's really, really key to highlight that different student groups will have different priorities when they approach the labour market, and we need to support that. And finally, when we look at preferred working environments, so again, thinking about Gen Z and the type of environments they want to find themselves in, number one thing for university students is to be intellectually challenged. That's really important. That's, of course, what they expect after they finish university. Secondly, is to be in creative and innovative environments. So how do we help them develop those skills to be innovative and creative themselves? And thirdly, serving a greater good. So again, going back to that meaning and meaningful jobs, Gen Z are really connected to that. We saw them being invested in climate change, social justice. All of this is really relevant when defining their careers. Again, if we have a look at differences between males and females, we can see that females are a lot more focused on serving a greater good in their job, which we've seen to be a consistent theme, while males are significantly more focused on developing technical skills and becoming a functional expert, as well as becoming a leader or a manager. So there's a lot more of that leadership confidence in males to this day, unfortunately, even in mature markets like the UK. Okay, and final section I wanted to run you through is since we touched on confidence and skills and what are some of the challenges and inequalities, just to show you the kind of skills development in the UK. So first of all, looking at university students, the top 3 skills that they're most confident in are problem solving, teamwork, and communication. So those are the skills they really feel they gain, by attending university, by doing their degrees, right? And the skills at the very bottom, where there's the least confidence, are technical and data skills, which are increasingly important in tech roles, which we know students really want. Innovation, commercial awareness, and entrepreneurship is also very, very low, right, in terms of how much students can relate to those skills. And we know that actually for employers, that's going to be pretty important. So there are obviously those skills gaps and how we're developing students and what the labour market is seeking. And of course, again, there'll be confidence challenges by group. If we have a look at the lower socioeconomic group, for example, we can see that overall, they're less confident in their skills. So they're at university in the same institution, but they're feeling a lot less confident about their prospects. Particularly, they struggle with leadership skills compared to the higher socioeconomic group, creativity skills, as well as some of the key skills around problem solving and teamwork. So just goes on to show that we should have targeted initiatives to support those students. And speaking about support, what support do students actually expect from graduate employers, right? So when they approach that job search process, the number one thing that students really want support from is finding a mentor or a buddy, particularly in a virtual world where we know there's been challenges of loneliness and disconnection, and this desire to fit in and be accepted. Finding a mentor is incredibly important, whether that's at university or with an employer. Secondly, relocation support. So if they're going to move around for work, then they want that support there. And thirdly, remote working. Yes, students are willing to work remotely, and of course they will do that. But again, not to assume that that's easy and that's not going to have any impact on their well-being. So that support is necessary. But the reason, again, I'm showing you the slide is just to show that the BAME group, so the ethnic minorities in the UK, Black and Asian ethnic minorities, generally feel they need more support from employers going forward around mentorship and financial advice. Those are the 2 things that really stand out.
Dasha, this is great. You're giving us such rich data. I want to be able to ask you a question or two. So if you could just bring it to an end in terms of your presentation, everyone will get a copy of it, but it's fantastic what you're sharing so far. Thank you.
No worries. Brilliant. That's basically all I really had for you today. Just, well, it's carefully timed. So I just wanted to mention a quick bespoke project that Sybil, as a market research consultancy in the UK, does with universities. You know, it runs student experience and student well-being that may be of interest. So, for example, we did a mental health national research project and how that's impacting students' career readiness and their choices and their confidence, which is going to be, you know, huge, particularly after the pandemic and the impact of that. And also, we did a bespoke project with a university, a leading university in the UK, and a leading employers looking at the LGBT population and how, again, their career prospects and priorities are impacted by being part of that minority and some of the challenges they may face in the workplace. So we do a lot of work around this, and we'd love to also work with you if that is of interest. And just to summarize some takeaways for educators from the session today. So we think it's really important to educate students on the variety of sectors and opportunities available. I think for too long in the UK, we've focused on traditional sectors, you know, around STEM subjects, maybe financial roles, kind of big corporate employers. But actually what we're seeing is that we really need that vocational training. We need to demonstrate to students that they can connect to employers meaningfully, you know, following their values.